Well, welcome everybody to another in the series of masterclasses. This is our way of helping you develop your skills via a self-study package. We've framed this through a series of masterclasses which we will be running throughout this year. These are published on the Change Management Network Facebook page. There's a link at the end of this class, and they're available on Open Learn Create and on the Tide YouTube channel as well. We're going to be publishing about 1 or 2 a month from now on. Completion of them will lead to a certificate of completion at the end of the Tide programme. We're going to be doing monthly quizzes to prepare you for the end of programme review, which you'll also have to complete to achieve that certificate. So today's masterclass is about an introduction to systems thinking. Let's start with a definition. Definition of systems thinking is grounded in interconnectivity, as you can see from this definition. It's all about how things interact with each other and have an impact on each other because of that interaction. It's a commonly recognised definition in management practice as the best way to address complex problems. So the more complex the problem, the more likely this definition is going to apply to it. Tide is a complex issue. It requires systems solutions. Driven by systems thinkers, ministers and policy development people in your system are driving the innovation and the changes that's going on in higher education, distance education in Myanmar. And it's also driven by the doers, change agents and change champions in the Tide programme. This is important because you are implementers of ministerial vision and policy. So this definition about the process of understanding how things influence one another within a whole. In nature, systems thinking examples include ecosystems. And we've got a lovely picture here of a coral reef and how it interacts with each other, how it feeds off each other, how it grows, only because of the conditions that it all needs. Okay, so all these different elements of the system work together to survive or perish in this example here. So this definition is very, very relevant to Tide, as you can see. So what examples can you identify of systems thinking, given that you've now know a little bit about the definition? What examples can you identify in the Tide Change Management Programme? Take a few minutes to think about examples of systems thinking in Tide. What do you identify? Can you explain why your ideas are typically examples of systems thinking in practice? We'll come back to some examples here over the next few slides. Firstly then, let's look at the 6 change management initiatives. Did your examples include the other change management projects? All the change management projects are interconnected and impact on each other in one way or another. Approaches and lessons from one project might well be relevant to another. So it's important that we discuss lessons together in our monthly meetings so that we don't fall into the trap of thinking we have to continually reinvent wheels or solutions every time an issue crops up, because many of those issues will be relevant to all these projects. So a good example, if you had thought of this yourself, would be to say that all 6 of the change management initiatives are examples of projects in a certain system because they all impact on each other and have impacts from outside as well. Let's put a bit of context around this really, so that you can more clearly get a feel for why all 6 projects are in a system here. With one campus, 2 systems policy, more universities than ever before are now able to develop and deliver distance education courses. The Ministry has expressed a strong desire to enhance employability of distance education students, and this requires skills in critical thinking going forward. We've just done a critical thinking masterclass on improving critical thinking skills. So if that is particularly relevant in your project, do have a look at that masterclass. The Ministry has also expressed a very strong desire in the context of environmental sciences, as these courses will be of real benefit to your country in the future. And also, your Ministry wants to raise the quality of distance education to enhance students' employment chances in the future as well. So as you can see, the current ministerial focus right at the top of this iceberg is on online systems and courses with a blended learning approach. That's where they are putting time, money and effort in developing online systems and supporting and encouraging courses to be delivered through a blended learning approach. So this is a strong vision, and you've received equally strong permission to develop your courses along these lines. As a result, we've got 6 change management initiatives which all in their own way synergize with this particular vision, and they're identified beneath the waterline in this slide. So as you can see, a vision is really important. We've also done a masterclass on elements for successful change, and the vision element, if you want to make change successful, is element A in that particular masterclass. So you can see that there's a golden thread going through these masterclasses and why we are doing them really. Vision is really important if these projects are to add value and be successful in this system. If vision was missing, then confusion would be rife. But it's not. Your Ministry is very clear about what it wants and needs distance education to deliver in the future. So let's briefly look at 6 principles then, and then we will go into each one individually. So 6 principles of systems thinking. Principle 1 is all about being more than the sum of your parts, about together you achieve more than if you were acting alone. System thinkers believe one part alone won't benefit the whole system vision. So what this principle 1 means is that all 6 projects acting together will have greater value for delivering your ministry's vision than one project acting alone. So you can see how we start making these links with principle 1. Principle 2 is about context, and environment is everything really. And this explains the need to appreciate the whole within which each part exists. If we remember that lovely coral reef we were looking at earlier in this presentation, the environment, the conditions within which that coral reef existed were absolutely paramount for its survival. So we need to appreciate the whole, what each adds to it, and how the environment nurtures it as well. Principle 3 is about a lot of cogs in the wheel needing to be aligned, okay? And that you can no longer rely on historical linear cause and effect. When you're working in a system for a system outcome, there are too many interdependent parts to rely on historical linear cause and effect. So principle 3 is about appreciating what each part of that system brings, and that at some stage they all need to be in alignment for that system to be really considered successful. Principle 4 is about understanding all these elements, and each of those elements is important if you are to understand why things happen in the way that they do. So you need to understand consequential effects, knock-on effects of one thing happening, about the effect it has elsewhere in the system. Principle 4 is very much like throwing a pebble in a pond and the ripples go outwards. You have to understand how far those ripples go and the effect that that pebble splash has on other parts of the system. Principle 5 is about integration not only being possible, but actually required for the system to function adequately. So this integrated nature of how all elements of the system interact with each other is absolutely vital for principle 5 here. And this is why with our 6 change management projects, principle 5 is all about to what extent can we learn project to project? What can we transfer from one project to another one by way of learning and experience, okay? And then finally, principle 6 is about systems produce unintended consequences sometimes, or most times actually, and we need to be aware of this possibility. And we look at how to do that in greater detail when we look at each one of these principles in its own right. So the next few slides are looking at these principles individually. So let's return to principle 1. We said it was about interaction and wholeness, about the whole being greater than the sum of its parts, okay? About all 6 projects, when taken as a whole, are far more able to contribute to the realization of your ministry's vision than one is in its own right. So think about an example that springs to mind in this element, in this principle. I'll give you a few moments just to think about what does wholeness mean, and what does being greater than the sum of the parts mean? And do you have an example of when you've worked on something that has contributed to being more than the sum of its parts? When we delivered this masterclass live, some examples for this particular principle included teamwork, a human body, even employment. Lots of interconnected things produce employment. And if we were to break down a human body, we could see that there are vital organs that if one was removed, maybe the body wouldn't survive. So being more than the sum of its parts, this is about being able to rely on other parts of the system to provide things that you in your project maybe can't. Was your example similar to these that came up in the live session? Think of others if you can too. Teamwork was a great example here. Principle 2 is all about openness. about the environment within which systems exist. And if we're looking at living systems can only be understood in the context of its environment. Earlier on, we looked at the coral reef. Now we look at a little seedling coming to life from a crack in the pavement. What would your examples be for openness? Principle 2 being openness. Think of some examples yourself. Openness points to having an open mind. It's about understanding perspectives, understanding how things impact on each other, and really about understanding possibilities. Context is everything. So this example here that we're looking at is all about growth in a drought, in a period of drought maybe, or certainly in the context of what on first sight looks like poor conditions or a poor environment to thrive. But nevertheless, the possibility exists. This seed has sprouted, okay? This is very much a factor in critical thinking too, appreciating the range of perspectives available. If you were just to see that crack in the pavement, would you have thought something might grow there? But it is a possibility. Understanding possibilities just by switching your perspective, insofar as there might be earth under the concrete, a bird might have dropped a seed, something might grow. So we've just done a critical thinking masterclass. So if you want to dive a little bit deeper into improving your critical thinking skills, have a look at that masterclass as well, because it's very much aligned to principle 2 of systems thinking, which is very much about having an open mind and understanding a range of perspectives, not just the most obvious one. Principle 3 is about patterns, identifying what is similar and maybe what is different as well, but understanding patterns as they are emerging. What would your example of recognizing patterns be? Depending on what group you are in, group 1 is very much looking at policy implications of the projects, and group 2 is very much looking at managerial influences from the project. So what would the patterns on policy or the patterns on managerial practices be that you have encountered so far in your project? Take a few moments to think about that. Again, when we did this session live, some examples for patterns, spotting patterns, were about best practice, about identifying best practice from elsewhere in similar contexts, so learning from others. And I remember an earlier Tide change management workshop where we had guests from Mauritius and Sri Lanka telling us about their experiences about opening an open university in their countries. So again, best practice from elsewhere would be an example of spotting patterns here. Identifying who you could compare with and why. Are they similar? What would be the point of comparing yourself with an area that was very, very different, unless it was to spot gaps? How can you produce regular standards in your own context? How are you identifying patterns which are similar across all 6 change management projects? Can you learn something of relevance from another project? And I suggest very strongly that you could. The challenge is, can we in Tide create the opportunity for you to discuss your projects across each of the 6 projects and learn from other projects? in these difficult times, that is very challenging, but we're going to try and do it at least once a month. This is why we set up the Change Management Network Facebook page, so that you're exposed to these sorts of generalizable lessons, and so that you can take relevant learning from elsewhere and use it for your own project's benefits. Try and use the Change Management Facebook page to have discussions with people from other projects. Ask questions. Discuss what is particularly challenging in your own project environment at this moment in time. And see if somebody can help you answer some of the questions, or at least share their experience of what's going on in their project, because it might well be similar to yours. So think about how your project might affect the other 5. Will the timelines in your project affect the delivery of another project maybe? What example could we give of that particular point? It might well be, if you are developing a blended learning course, that you need some delivery from the online systems and practices project before you can actually publicize your course. So you can see how these projects start interacting with each other. What's being put in place for another project which will help your project maybe? And these sorts of questions and discussions could certainly take place on the Change Management Network Facebook page. There's nothing stopping you. It's a closed group. Only those who ask to join and get accepted to join are in there. So it's, it should be a nice, non-threatening environment to ask these sorts of questions and to learn from other people's experiences. So principle 4 then is about purposefulness. What do you know about how things happen? Why do they happen in the way that they do? What is the cause and effect? Or what is the culture or the context that makes things happen the way that they do in your project? This is all about know-how, knowing how to navigate your own way in the environment that you currently work in. Know-how is a very powerful skill. Know-how describes practical knowledge or skills as an expertise. And this is about knowing who the expert in the field is, or at least the person that you can go to as a critical friend or a source of advice, okay? An example of someone with know-how might be the technical lead that is assigned to your project. Each project has its own UK technical lead who will be communicating with you regularly, at least monthly, and it might be that person that you need to ask questions about understanding why things happen in the way that they do. They are people who have more technical knowledge than others on the detail of your project. They might have worked in the specialist area for some time, and they can help clarify your understanding on the detail of what is needed in your project. It could be procedural knowledge. It could be practical knowledge of how to get something done. It could be technical knowledge of what you need to get in place for something to happen. Either way, the UK Specialist Lead is a key person for you to interact and communicate with regularly if you are to grow your understanding on why things happen in the way that they do. This principle is especially important when you develop in your case studies over the next few months, because you will need to articulate the purpose of why you set out to undertake a piece of work or project that you did. Why is it relevant in the context? So bear this particular masterclass in mind when you come to do your case studies. Principle 5 is about something we call multidimensionality, an overly complex word really, which just describes complementary relations, opposing tendencies, okay, and about creating something good from unexpected places, from unexpected parts, or what on first sight might have been an infeasible part. So this takes into account multifaceted nature of what you do, okay? That you don't operate in a vacuum, that what you do has implications on others elsewhere in the same system. You have this pebble in the pond example crops up again, okay? So recognizing the component parts that are all needed for smoother interaction to happen is really important. Some might call this the oil in the engine. What is it that makes these component parts interact with each other very smoothly? Okay, so this is about to what extent are things moving smoothly in the system that is the 6 change management projects, and what's stopping it? Do we have communication issues? Are you interacting with each other, albeit virtually at the moment, but nevertheless, are you able to interact with each other smoothly? Are you all able to access the change management Facebook page to ask the questions that need to be asked? Are you all making yourselves available to your UK technical lead in order to push this project forward? Okay, so this is about something we call multidimensionality, but really this is the oil in the engine. Is the system fluid enough to have good communication throughout its different parts? It's one of the reasons why we've aligned a policy lead to each of these projects as well, so that the policy context can be appreciated for each of these projects as well. And then the final principle is about being counterintuitive. What elements are counterintuitive? And all this means is that actions, we usually plan actions to produce a desired outcome, but we have to be understanding and knowledgeable of the fact that sometimes, with the best will in the world, we might get counterintuitive or unintended consequences as a result of our actions that, despite all our best planning, we couldn't have foreseen. So some things happen as a result of what we do in these projects which are unintended, but to the best of our ability, we must try and predict what they might be. This is all about risk management, okay? System thinking forces you to think of all possible unintended consequences and try to balance them with the intended benefits, the benefits that you had proposed would happen from these actions. For example, if X happens, then we might need a plan B. If X happens, then we'll still do it, but maybe slower or with more people to keep on time. So this pushes out, this principle 6 about recognizing the counterintuitive actions forces us to think what might happen. We might not have intended to happen, but it is possible that it could happen, and therefore to think about things that we can put in place to manage those unintended consequences. And if you remember, John did a very good masterclass on project management. And project management is very much about managing time, managing effort, and managing risk. And this principle floats into project management thinking somewhat because it forces you to think about unintended consequences and what you might do about those. There's no magic wand, there's no fairy that will wave the wand and make those unintended consequences go away. As change agents, you have to deal with them and manage them. And particularly if you're in a project in group 2 that is looking at managerial influences, this will become very important. It helps you manage any risk of failure. And therefore, this is important when you come to write up your case studies as well. So a little bit of reflection then. Personal reflection about why is understanding each of those 6 principles of systems thinking important in what we are doing across the change program in TIDE. I'll just give you a little moment to think about that yourselves. So what examples did you think of? Well, let's run through a few. Ministerial priorities. There is something much larger at stake. That's why it's important to understand systems thinking, because there is something much, much larger at stake than any of these individual projects in their own right. Your own individual role in that higher priority for your country is important if your ministry's vision is to be realised. Recognising your part in helping to improve the quality and delivery of distance education in Myanmar. Recognising all 6 projects need to be equally successful for the ministry to realise its vision is really important. If one fails, the vision will not be totally realised. Employability for your students. If all 6 projects are successful, then students have potential for enhanced opportunities. That is precisely what your ministry is driving for the future. It helps to identify great influence, where it comes from and how you can use it, etc. It expands the potential for success. We all succeed together. Okay, this is about being greater than the sum of your parts, principle 1. It gives you the opportunity for better evaluation. It might indicate new opportunities for new partnerships or external policy changes. This is why the policy lead's role is so important. But this interconnectivity, this integration across the projects will definitely flush out some new opportunities of working together. It'll help you identify what external factors are influencing the success of your project. Some you can control, and some you cannot. But you need to know what they are. And this is also useful for developing your case study. Is that a shift needs to happen. And these are the tools of a systems thinker, really. It's about moving from disconnected parts, disconnected universities, all doing your own thing in terms of distance education, towards a more interconnected approach. It's about moving away from a linear cause and effect approach to a much more circular approach, that we're all in this together. We are more than the sum of our parts. It's very much about moving away from silo working to the emergence of working together in a systems way. And it's about recognizing that each university or each project is just a part of a much bigger distance education system now, with the one campus, two systems policy, and that together you make a whole. Nobody can operate independently. And it's about understanding analysis of what's going on in your own part of that system, but it's very much about communication right across that system and putting it back together with meaning. So learning from other parts of the system and importing that learning into your own place. And that's what we call synthesis, putting things back together with greater meaning. And it's moving away from being isolated in what you do to having general relationships right across that system with each other, with each other's projects, with policy leads in your environment, with technical leads in the environment of your project. And it's about creating these relationships so that bigger and better things can happen than might happen if you were isolated on your own. And these are some of the conditions that are driving the distance education changes in Myanmar. So this is the context and the environment within which these 6 projects are happening. There's definitely an emphasis on greater employability, about distance education preparing students for employment in the future. There's definitely an emphasis on better quality of distance education in the future, because you will want to attract more students to courses, but those courses have to be of high quality if you are to attract greater numbers. Often it's about competitiveness. Asiatic region for students is very, very competitive. Lots of students go to Japan or elsewhere in your area. And this is about your ministry wanting students to come to Myanmar for this sort of higher education learning, okay? There's nothing wrong with wanting to be the best in your region. And that's a great driver for improving distance education in Myanmar. And ultimately, it's about creating a better reputation for what you do. Obviously, your ministers want Myanmar to succeed on a world stage. They want to retain local graduates to invest in the improvement of the country, rather than losing new graduates to other countries maybe to gain that experience. So these are the conditions. This is the environment. This is the waters within which the coral reef of distance education in Myanmar is operating within. And I just wanted to remind you who your UK technical leads were. And this slide identifies who they are for each of those 6 projects. So this is nothing more than a reference slide, really. You'll be hearing from your UK technical lead frequently. They can help you progress your project and also support you to deal with the systems issues which will invariably arise. Don't be afraid to ask them for help. I wanted to draw your attention to a free 8-week course on mastering systems thinking in practice that the Open University offers, and this is available on Open Learn Create. It's in far greater detail than this short introduction to systems thinking masterclasses. Today's session just introduces you to some general principles, but if it has interested you and you want to take that learning to a higher level, I just wanted to draw your attention to this course, which is free on Open Learn Create. So what's your next steps then? You've had a brief introduction to systems thinking here. I would like you to do a little bit of self-study and think about how you can see where your project fits into the Myanmar system of distance education improvements. So I have a bit of a thought process around the overall improvement agenda that's going on with distance education at the moment and see where your project fits into that. Hopefully you'll be able to identify what is or what are the key other change management projects which has important impacts on yours. Some of them will have much more closeness of impact on your project than others. But at least do a little bit of self-thinking around which ones are most closely related to what you're doing in your project, okay? Because those are the people that you could probably learn the most from. Identify what your project impacts upon, okay? So you might well impact on another project, but you need to understand where and how your work has a consequence on one of the other projects, and decide how you will share the learning.